you. Let me phrase my question differently this time around. Is there such a thing as a mutually beneficial separation between an employee and a company which is in distress at this time?
At this time, we're not seeing it. It is not impossible for a company to do that. Remember, in our law, a statutory or a forced retrenchment would require the company, the employer, to pay the employee only 1 week for every completed year of service, the contractual notice pay, and the accrued annual leave days. Now, there are so many nuances to that it would be very easy to sweeten that deal, and in return for that ex gratia, as we call it, that additional amount, secure what we would call a mutual termination agreement, which would confer on the employer the benefit of a release and a waiver of any claims arising from that termination. So it's not impossible.
Yeah. And the companies themselves, what should they be doing at this time, the minute they start noticing that they are going to go into financial difficulty? How soon should they start communicating to their employees who will be affected?
That is a really good question, because that is something that we're seeing a difficulty with. It's about communication. Remember, in the law, under Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act, an employer, it's peremptory. You must contemplate, or you must communicate to your employees when you contemplate retrenchment. However, there are also other measures that you could be putting in place that would also affect changes to terms and conditions of employment that currently exist. And for that reason, you need to have open communication and dialogue with your employees. What I found companies do that is effective is they have an open dialogue kind of portal or platform on their intranet or whatever, where they're constantly sharing changes to the landscape and what they're considering doing, and getting constant feedback from employees. So when it comes time to look at implementing a short time or a layoff or looking at using annual leave, no one is surprised, and they're just grateful for the inclusion in the conversation as it develops to that point.
Sherisa, let's talk about alternatives to retrenchments. Companies who are finding difficulty at this time. I was reading somewhere where it says that there could be an option to defer salaries and even bonuses, for example, or even increases. Those can be deferred in favor of a person retaining their job.
So, yeah, the deferring would be around impacting salary increases, bonuses, and incentives. So rather than increasing your employee liability, limited by maybe not even deferring it, just not giving it, repurposing it. There are also other options you could look at, such as looking at where you could get relief under your liabilities, your loans, that sort of stuff, so that you could keep food on the table for your employees. That's really how dire the situation is. If you look at the statistics that were published, I think it was on Wednesday, we've had a 156% increase in CCMA referrals relating to retrenchment terminations. That means we've had about 100,000 employees, because the 1,500 cases translates to about 100,000 employees who have been terminated from March to now. And in a country where we, prior to COVID-19, had a 29.1% unemployment rate, and that's on a globular figure, not looking at youth unemployment, graduate unemployment. These are huge figures. So if that means I need to look at how I can cull my lease liability in order to keep food on the tables of my employees, we need to be looking as South Africans to be doing that. The companies that are getting on with it, business as usual, they've successfully implemented digital solutions permitting temporary remote work. And that then allows you to very quickly look at repurposing your lease, claiming what we would call force majeure or supervening impossibility of performance on other liabilities, so that your employees can be paid their normal salaries. But very real options are: don't pay incentives, don't increase salaries when you're not certain that you can afford it for the next 6 to 12 months. I mean, we've heard our minister talk about recovery plans spanning, in some instances, up to 5 years. So I think we need to be realistic with our budget as a country in an emerging market with what we have right now.
Yeah. Some time ago, Sherisa, there was talk from COSATU trying to appeal to, I think, National Treasury that workers be allowed to access a portion of their pension funds in order to just keep going while companies perhaps are unable to pay them. Is that an option, particularly in the private sector?
So, I read an article exactly on that point around claiming under pension, under income protectors, etc., where you would otherwise claim in the instance of no longer being employed, being terminated, being ill, etc. And I don't know. I think the answer lies in the specific rules of the pension fund and whether the adjudicator and regulators would be open to a special rule being passed, an amendment being passed to those rules to permit the accrued members' interest being paid out to these employees at this point in time. I think that it's a gray area in the law, and I think that might become a very real probability in order to survive these times for many, many incomes in South Africa.